Plan for today is kind of do a wrap-up. We're going to do a summary and another wrap-up of these two chapters on planting, chemical application, the broadcast, spreading stuff out in the field. So we're going to go through that and kind of go over some concepts and any questions that you have on that from those videos and so forth, or is there anything that was kind of confusing. Also want to talk again about the lab, because the lab we're going to do on Wednesday can be a little bit confusing. So I want to look at that a little bit more as well. So that one tends to, people scratch their head a little bit until they figure out, oh, okay, that's what's going on. So hopefully we can get that, oh, that's what's going on, kind of attitude here, that feeling this morning, and then we'll know what we're doing on Wednesday. So exam a week from today, and what I'll do is I'll do a quick overview on Wednesday of what's going to be on the exam, so I'll talk about that, and that's and the format and everything's going to be real similar to the first exam, so there won't be any surprises there. It'll just be content. We'll talk about content and any questions you have about the exam. We'll answer them on Wednesday. Okay? Sound cool? Good? Any questions before we roll? We're good to go? Alright. Yep. Okay, planting and chemical application then. So what we want to do, again, there's two chapters, and it's I kind of think it's kind of silly that there's two separate chapters in your textbook on this, because it's really all the same thing. So what are we doing? And there's our goal right there. The goal is to apply some input to a geographic area at some desired rate. So the amount, that there's a certain amount that I want to put on. So it could be gallons per acre, it could be seeds per acre, it could be in some of the protection chemicals that we use, it's on the order of fluid ounces or milliliters per acre. So I mean very, very potent chemicals sometimes that we use that we're spreading across a field, and we have to dilute them and get them spread to, you know, the right amount. Uniformity, there's got to be some uniformity, so some desired distribution, so there's got to be some uniformity and some desired distribution. So in some cases we want extremely uniform application as much as possible, no hot spots, no low spots. Some things like with seeds and so forth, we want them in rows and we want them precisely placed, and so, you know, everything's a little bit different depending on what we're doing, but it's still the same idea. And then those functional processes, like I talked about in the videos, you know, we've got to have a container to store the stuff. We've got to meter the stuff out at the right rate, and that depends on how fast we're moving across the field. We have to distribute that stuff, and there might be some conveying involved to distribute that to a certain place, and then place it. So sometimes we want to be very precise about where we place it. Sometimes we just kind of fling it on the ground, and it's okay. So with, you know, the moisture and stuff will move the chemical or whatever it is to where it needs to be to do what it needs to do. Okay, so there's a real variety of things that are going on there, but that's the general idea. So we're putting this stuff on, spreading it across some geographic area at a certain rate. All right, that's pretty straightforward, right? We can get our head wrapped around that. Okay. We're good with that. Yep. So somehow I got to wake up this morning so we can discuss some things or whatever. Yeah, this is. So let's talk about some precision placement here. And I have some drawings, and I know I didn't print these out for you guys, but these are kind of, I will put them. These slides are from what was in the, they're kind of a summary of the slides that were on there online for these videos to support the videos and everything. So these slides should all be in there. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this precision placement. So again, sometimes with some of this equipment, and I'll look at some equipment here. And actually, maybe let's go ahead and do that. Let's look at some different pieces of equipment. It's toy day here, so we'll pass some toys around. So let's go back up and talk about what some of this stuff is. Maybe let's start there. Get you guys involved a little bit. So what are we putting on? What's this? The pink stuff.
Corn.
Corn, yep. Why is it pink? Corn isn't typically pink. It's usually like that yellow, you know, like candy corn that we can buy this time of year, you know, that yellow and orange, and it's good stuff, isn't it? No. Some people go, that stuff is good. I don't like it either. My father-in-law would eat that stuff, though he'd throw up, but he would blow it. Yeah, no. So, why is it pink?
It's to keep the bugs from eating?
Yeah, so there's all kind of things that we apply to the corn to do a lot of different things, and that's one of the things is to keep bugs from going after. So we'll have some additives or some powders or coatings that we put on these seeds to protect them from bugs, so the bugs don't eat them before they can germinate and grow. Some of them might be a germination protection, so some of them might be for storage, so that we don't want it to germinate early. If I get that bag gets a little bit moist, and I've got those seeds and they start to sprout before I get them on the field, then they're no good, right? So I need to control that germination until I want it to happen. Sometimes those are germination aids, so they'll help to germinate. So there'll be a little bit of nutrients or something in there to kind of give them a juice to get the seeds started. So there's a lot of different things that we can put on that. So a lot of coatings and a lot of preparations that we'll use on seeds before we put them out in the field. So there could be a lot of different things going on. Some of that stuff, then you got to be careful how you handle it. So you don't want that stuff on your hands and rubbing your eyes and in your mouth and stuff like that. And so now we got to start thinking about how we handle these materials, so the people that are the operators that are handling them, they're putting them in the machines and stuff like that, how are they handling them, what's going on. So yeah, we got to think about that kind of stuff. So some of our seeds are corn seeds, some of them are little itty bitty tiny seeds like that. So those are actually, I think that was a picture, I put that a couple years ago, but I think that's hemp seeds. I think I found somebody with a handful of hemp seeds. That may be mine, and that's not my hand, but that's somebody else's hand. I think that's just hemp seeds. So some of them are pretty small, some of them are irregularly shaped. Hemp seeds are kind of odd shaped things. Some of them, like soybeans, are like little BBs, you know, they're balls, so they're perfectly round. So they're all different kinds of shapes that we have to deal with. All right, so what's this stuff up here? Any idea? The multicolored pretty stuff?
Chemicals.
So,
fertilizer?
Yeah, it's more of a fertilizer. It could be some chemicals, but typically this would be a fertilizer, a dry fertilizer formulation. So, what are your primary nutrients that you're putting in the soil?
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen? What's the other two?
Phosphorus.
Phosphorus and N, P, and K. What's K?
Potassium.
Potassium. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Sometimes farmers will talk about potash instead of potassium, a little different formulation, but that's what they're familiar with talking to it about. So you're going to see three different colors of stuff in there. Well, typically you'll see four when you look at a fertilizer. So typically there'll be four. If it's just a nutrient fertilizer, there'll be some nitrogen granules in there. There'll be some phosphorus and some potash or potassium granules of some kind. And then there's usually a fourth color of stuff in there that's basically a filler. So it gives me a little bit more volume so I can handle it a little bit easier. So the metering and stuff like that. So it's easier to go through the machines if I'm not trying to just meter out a teeny tiny volume of stuff. So I mix it up, I dilute it, kind of like I dilute liquid chemicals in water. So we're going to dilute it in, basically a salt kind of a solution, salt kind of a granule or something like that. And we can spread it out in the field. It allows us to spread a little bit easier. So often there's four different granules in there. So what do you notice about that? And how do we, well, let's talk about how we typically distribute that stuff in the field. So those granular things, how are we distributing them?
With the spreader.
With a spreader, all right? So, and I think I got some pictures. Yeah, so that's one of the pictures I had. The one on the upper right there is a typical way that we do that. So literally what that is a fan. So it's a disc with blades on it on the back of that thing. We drop that material on there, that disc is spinning, and we fling it. And good luck where it goes, right? So engineers think about that. Here is one of these. I got a couple of these. We'll pass toys around. So this is one, let's see, yeah, here's a simpler one. So simpler machine. I got three machines here that'll do granular material. So here's one of the machines that'll do granular material. Here's another machine actually that does that same type of granular material. A little bit different design, kind of an oddball thing, right? So it's got booms on it. So what's going on there? And then this is a similar thing that would go on the back of a tractor. And I'll send them around in just a second. We'll talk about them. But a couple things I wanted to point out about these machines. Yeah, typically it's just a spinning disc A lot of these bigger ones will have two. You can actually see them on the back. These actually, I thought they spun, but they don't. But you can kind of see them right on the back there where the little discs are. So the material gets pulled out of the machine. There's a belt in there that will pull the material out the bottom of the bin, drop it on those spinners, and then it just flings it out where it goes, okay? So think about all those particles. So that's that machine in the upper left. Are all those particles the same size? You look at it, no. Are they all the same density? Probably not. Will they all fly the same direction, the same distance, and terminal velocities and all that kind of stuff? Okay, so, you know, there's a lot of thought process that goes into how do we get this out there, how do we get a decent distribution. But now think about that, it's kind of interesting. Because material that's coming out, you know, it's going to be basically coming out as a fan. So some of the material go out to the sides, some out the bottom, you know, out both sides and stuff like that. So think about the material coming straight out the back. So the machine's moving across the field and it's coming straight out the back. Some particles are flying further than others. Does that matter? With the material that's going straight out the back of the machine. Trey's shaking his head, no, why not, Trey?
Because as you drive along, it's...
Yeah, so it's throwing some further than others, but it's all going straight behind the machine. So as I'm moving along, those ones that flow further, okay, you know, the next wing or whatever that spreads some more out there, it's going to fill it in, and so I'm going to get a fairly even distribution. But now what about out to the side of the machine? What's going to happen? Now I'm going to have some issues because some particles will fly further out the side than some other particles. And so out here, I can get some stratification in that pattern. So I'm going to get some particles of a certain kind, and I could get streaking, and we actually do see that kind of sometimes in some of this type of application. So that's one of the things that people work hard in terms of engineering. How do I affect that, keep that from happening, keep weird things from going on? So these, and I'll send that machine around. So this spreader has a lot of technology, and this is a little itty bitty thing, so I know it's kind of hard to see or whatever. But if you look in the back, there's a lot of hardware around the bottom. So some of these spreaders, like that thing, is pretty simple. It's just two fans out there, let her fly, and away we go. This has got two fans back here, but it's got a lot of extra little pieces. It's got some, on this side you can see kind of a sort of a fins on the side or whatever that come down. Those fins will actually direct particles in different directions, and they'll try to change the airflow and the particle flow, the particle velocity as they're coming out of those discs and everything. This one actually has a lot of innovations in terms of how the material is dropped onto that disc. So basically, all I need to do, the disc is underneath the tank on this one. So all I need to do is have a hole there, and if I want more material, I have a bigger hole or a smaller hole, you know. So, and simply what a lot of manufacturers do is literally have a square hole with a cover that slides over it. And so as I want more material, I open that cover a little bit more, and it allows more material to flow down through. So what these guys do, and this is a company out of Germany, I was actually able to tour that company a couple of years ago and talk to their owner, a really fascinating guy, you know, really interesting and very innovative kind of guy, looking at some of this spreader technology. But they said, you know, we figured out that a square hole isn't the best. So they've got like this teardrop shaped hole that is sort of odd shaped, and so as you cover and uncover that hole, it's uncovering it in a weird shape so that as it drops onto the spreader, they're actually controlling how that material falls on that spreader. So where it falls in terms of the angle of where that spinning disc is, so how it's hitting the disc, how far out on the disc, and that's going to change how far the material goes. And they're actually able to do some control, what we call automatic section control. And I don't think I went into that technology in the videos very much, but when you think about automatic section control, if I have a boom like this, a wide hardware boom that has certain outlets or something like that, I can figure out mechanically, you guys are engineers, right? I can shut some of these off, right? So if I'm going across the field and, you know, there's some obstruction there or whatever, and I don't want to put that material there, I just shut some of these off. And I can do that, you know, I can have valves, I can have whatever, do a lot of different things to shut that off, not a big deal. These guys have figured out with this spinner, how to do that with the spinner. So just by changing where they drop that material on the disc, they can actually change, okay, does this go out uniformly behind this machine, or does it all go out one side, or can I turn off one side and not the other side? So they do some really innovative stuff, and it's a lot of engineering, it's a lot of experimentation, a lot of modeling to figure out, okay, where do I drop it on that disc so that it goes out where I want it to go? Okay, crazy? Are you impressed a little bit? I hope I can at least give you a little bit of an idea that that is pretty impressive engineering on that. So I'll pass that one around, you can look at it. A couple other things to look at with these machines. Look at the tires on these machines, okay? So pretty different there, right? This one has 4 tires, really skinny tires. This one has 3 big fat tires. What's my philosophy? What's the difference? What am I thinking about there?
Reducing compaction.
Reducing compaction. So this machine, if it's got some weight on it, and I got little itty bitty tires, it's going to compact the soil. If I've got big fat tires, it's going to spread out my weight. And notice this is a tricycle configuration. So here, as the machine moves across the field, these little tires, I'm going to have 2 tires that hit the same spot in the field. Here I spread it out over the width of the machine. All right, so a little different philosophy. Can I stick this machine between rows of corn out there? It's going to smash the heck out of every plant that's out there. So if I need to get through rows, then I might use a machine like this. So different philosophy in terms of how am I managing the crop? Where am I compacting? You know, can I live with some compaction? Do I really need to spread that weight out? What's going on there? So a lot of different philosophies there that we have to think about, different options that the manufacturers give to the consumers, to what, you know, kind of machine they're going to buy and what they're going to be able to do with it. All right. So this machine, how's it spreading the material? So here, these are mechanical. Both those other machines are just mechanical discs. Fling it out there. Here it goes. Right. This has a pneumatic carrier in it. So basically, there's a great big old fan up here that blows air, and these, you can see how this boom is thicker in the center and thinner out on the edge. And it's a bunch of pipes going out there. So the first pipe is short, so the first pipe comes out and ends here, the second pipe comes out and ends there, third, fourth, you know, all the way out to here. So I got 1 pipe left out here. So basically that's a big air distribution that is pushing air through those pipes, and then I drop the particles into those pipes and then distribute them out that way, so I'm forcing them out. So instead of relying on that trajectory motion and, you know, drag forces and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to still, same kind of forces involved, but I'm going to push them out through a pipe and then have them injected out here. Again, I have theoretically better control of the distribution across the back of the machine, and I have better options in terms of turning some of this off. So I can close gates on some of these pipes and not let anything come out through that pipe. And so I can only have going out what I want going out in a certain part of the machine. Okay, does it make sense? What's going on? So some different philosophies there. These are noisy as all get out. You think about that big fan blowing air going through there, so they whistle and hiss and make all that noise. You can send them around, play with them, make your machine noises, or whatever you want to do. Right? So just some options there for how we distribute that granular material. Again, this is material that we're just distributing out. Typically fertilizer materials or this stuff. Any idea what that powdery stuff is? Another nutrient that we need for the soil.
Lime.
So it's lime, yeah. So this is something to control the pH of the soil. So the bug crawling on the screen. I got a bug on the screen. So yeah, it'd be lime. So, and a lot of times that comes in a very fine powder. So now I've got to distribute that powder. So same kind of machinery. How do I do that? But now, you know, what's the terminal velocity and the trajectory, particle trajectories, how are those different from this fine powdery material and that granular material up there? So different machines in terms of how we set them up, how we get it to distribute, and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of engineering thought has to go into how we do this stuff. All right? Questions? So far, comments? Making sense? Really bored? Whatever. I'll never run one of these machines in my life, so I don't care, yeah, but it will be on the final, so I have to care. All right, so let's talk about placement. Okay, that's the stuff, generally fertilizers, that kind of stuff, lines, spread it out there, get it close, get somewhat of a reasonable distribution. The rain's gonna come, it's gonna dissolve the stuff, it's gonna leach through the soil. Hey man, it gets where we need it to go, and we're a cool deal. Although sometimes we do want to place that fertilizer. So these are drawings of more precision planting equipment. So this is where we'd be putting seeds, typically corn, sometimes soybeans that we'll plant in very precise rows and very precise seed spacings. So farther apart seed spacing that I want to plant. And sometimes we'll actually add fertilizer with these things. So instead of putting fertilizer between the rows where that's going to help the weeds, that's a bad thing. Let's put the fertilizer in the row where it's going to help the plants. That's a good thing, right? So more efficient use of our nutrients and stuff like that. So there's a lot of practices like that that we use in agriculture to have a little bit more efficient use of those kind of chemicals, reduce the amount that's going to leave the site, hopefully, and leaching and so forth, because the plants are going to utilize this stuff. So that's what we do there. But let me kind of stretch your imagination a little bit. So go back to that corn seed and think about that corn a little bit. So we want to plant corn. Typically it's in about a 6 to 7 to 8 inch spacing, something like that. So we want a corn seed about that far as we go across the field. So that's a typical spacing of corn. So we drop them in there in rows. Typically the rows in U.S. agriculture are 30 inches. So every 30 inches we have a row, and then seeds every 7 inches out across that row. So there's some research. I was just talking to an agronomist last week about this. They're doing some research on how we drop that corn seed in there. So I want to do that. And I talked in the video about how these tubes are curved and everything. So as the machine's going forward, we have those relative velocities, So we want to drop that seed down so it doesn't bounce and move. But they're saying, okay, I want to go one step further. I don't want to just have that seed in the right spacing. I want to have that seed oriented the right way. So I'm going to take that corn seed, of course it has a pointy end, a fat end, or whatever, you guys eat corn or whatever. So I want to put that in there, and I want to have that oriented the right way. So what happens, what they found is if they look at the corn seed when it goes in the ground, when that plant comes up out of the ground, those first 2 leaves that will come off of that seed always come off in the same orientation relative to that seed. So if you look at the way that seed was laid in the soil, those 2, when that plant comes out of the ground, the first 2 leaves are always oriented in one particular way relative to that seed. So why do I care? Think about those corn seeds in a row. So here's my row, and I'm going to put corn seeds in there like this. All right? Then that first plant comes up there, and this is the way we do it now. That first plant comes up there, and those first 2 leaves might come out and start going in this direction. So they usually come out in pairs. So I'd have those leaves coming out in that direction, an orientation like that. The next one comes out like this. So it got in there sideways, so it comes out like this. And okay, but it's got some overlap with that other leaf there. And so these agronomists are telling us, and I've seen some research on it, they're saying, hey, if we can put them all in the ground in the same direction, we can get all those leaves to come out like this. And it looks cool as heck. All right, I've seen some of these research, they show pictures of a row of corn, and every plant that comes out of there, those first 2 leaves, are coming out perfectly sideways like that. All right? Why would I want to do that? Why would I care? I mean, it looks cool. What?
You can fit more in less area.
More and less area. Why? Go a little bit deeper with that.
So the overlap's not there, which means you can put them closer together, which gives you higher yield.
Higher yield, yeah, because what do I need to get to these plants? What's up above that makes a plant grow that we don't know how it works? The sun, the light, okay? So if I can get maximum light interception on every one of those plants that I know that they're not competing with each other for light, and then possibly, yes, Cynthia, I can maybe squeeze a few more plants in there and maybe increase my yields because they're not fighting for light and they're still gonna fight for nutrients. So that's still the other thing that I've got away there. I put too many plants. They fight for nutrients, fight for moisture. The soil can't hold enough nutrients and moisture, and so they're not gonna do fare well. So there's still a lot of things to think about. But man, if I can have maximum light interception, that's a really cool idea. All right, you're engineers. You design a machine to do that? Like really fast as I'm going out across the field? So that's what they're coming to agronomists or coming to engineers and now saying, okay, you got to figure out how to do this. So I got to take a machine like this, and this is a typical machine that we would plant corn with. So you can tell because my units, my planting units are spread relatively wide across the back of that machine. So this is one actually has 16 rows. So in big Midwest agriculture, this is actually a relatively small one, so on the smaller side, so small side of average. So a lot of machines we're seeing at 24, so it's very common to have 24 rows. There are machines, Case makes one that's 36, and John Deere makes one that's 48. So basically 3 times the size of this machine in one machine. So absolutely humongous machines that are planted in multiple rows out across the field, right? So I gotta have whatever kind of mechanism that I'm going to put in the bottom of this thing to be able to orient those seeds when I put them in the soil to make sure they get in the right orientation. All right? Engineering challenge, go for it, figure that one out. So there you go. So that's a typical planting machine there. So this is typical corn, what we call a precision planter. Again, most of the time it's corn, sometimes we'll also do soybeans. Often we don't do soybeans in as wide a row as we do in corn, so soybeans are typically every other row. So sometimes we'll have, they'll build planters with twice as many units and then they're staggered. So there's one like in between, so they'll have 2 toolbars or something like that, and they'll have a second set of these planting units so that one lines up right in between each one of the other ones. And so then I give rows every 15 inches instead of every 30 inches. And so then I use the same machine for soybeans. I put soybeans in everything. If I'm going to plant corn, I put corn in every other one. I don't use them all, so I do something like that with it. So that's typically what I do. Interesting engineering challenge of this thing. So this is a 16 row, 30 inches. That's what, 30 inches, that ends up being 30 feet. Something like that. 4 rows is 10 feet. So 4 times 40 feet. That's 40 feet, all right? So, how do I get that down the highway? Right? That's big. And how do I get that 48 row machine down the highway? What am I going to do? So there's an engineering challenge. Is all right, how do I fold these things up or do whatever with them to get them to get down the highway? So there's some interesting engineering in there. There's a mechanical part of it. So this particular planter, actually the hitch will extend, and they raise it up and you literally turn it sideways. And so that's the way they will transport this one down the road, is just sideways. So it goes down the road sideways like that. So some of them will have different ways of folding them up and do all kind of weird things. We're actually very fortunate in the US that we don't have very stringent laws in terms of transport on the highway. You go to Europe, they have very, very stringent laws. So nothing that goes down the highway can be more than 3 meters wide. Period. That's it. So that's why on tractors and stuff like that in Europe, you'll almost never see dual tires, because you can't build a tractor narrow enough to have dual tires on there. So they go a single set of tires and really wide tires. That's typically what they do. So they have to come up with all kind of really unique ways to fold these things up so that they fit inside that 3 meters. So they're tucking stuff in and it gets high and everything. It's kind of gawky sort of things, but there's a pretty interesting engineering challenge, right? So this is precision planter, typically corn, sometimes soybeans. This is an example of a drill, what we call a grain drill. So this is going to plant rows a lot narrower. So typically in the US, 7 inches is what we have. So 7-inch row spacing. And this would be used for more small grains. So wheat, oats, barley, canola, those kind of crops that I would be growing on a drill, something like this. This is a pretty small one, so again, we can have these things that get really, really big, get really large machines, all right? So, but that's what you see there. So you see a whole lot more row units on the bottom of them than what you see on this one. So Yeah, more toys to come around there. Some examples of different kinds of things that we put out. So that's the seeds. So that's precision placement. And thinking about, okay, how precise do we want to be? And what do we need to do? So all that kind of stuff. So, all right, so what did we do? Yeah, we did the granular stuff. We did the seeds. We talked about the spacing, putting it in the soil. Then we got all those chemicals over there. Don't you love that picture? So that's a great picture to sell chemicals, old palo and everything else. So, anyway, how do we get those out there? So different machines here again. This is granular or seed placement typically. So here we have, you know, what I'm setting around there, the tanks are right with the on each individual row unit on the precision planter, or one tank that's on top of that grain drill. Here, the tank is a separate. So we put our seeds back here, and then we got to have hoses and transport mechanisms and ways to get that stuff out distributed across the machine that's actually placing them in the soil. So yeah, that's an interesting challenge there. So Cynthia found something cool there. I forgot to point that out for folks. So you can pull these out, right? You know what they are? There's a little arm that comes out of there. I saw her pulling it out, and I forgot to mention that. I was going to mention that. So this arm folds up. There's one on each side of the machine. Okay? Any idea what it does?
It's a little marker.
Yeah, it's a marker. So when I go across the field, this is a really wide machine. I turn around. My tractor's in the center of this thing. When I turn around and going back, how do I know where to drive? Because I really want 30-inch rows all the way along. So between the last row on this pass and the first row on the next pass, I want there to be exactly 30 inches in between. So how do I do that? This is a marker that goes out, just a disc out on the end of it, and all it does is cut a groove in the soil. Just makes a groove, makes a mark. And so as I go across with my tractor here, this mark is out here. The length of this is typically, and you can set them up different ways, but a lot of times this will be half the length of the machine. Puts a mark basically in the center of where the next machine pass would be. So as I come around the other way to line up, I'm going to line up my tractor right on that mark that I made on the soil, and if I can follow that mark directly, that's going to put my planter in the right place. So that's what these markers are. So one goes out either side to do that. Right? Now you don't see a marker on that machine there. How come?
GPS.
Yeah, there's a GPS receiver on top of the tractor, so the computer can do it. In fact, the operator, is probably not even driving the thing. The operator's probably, it doesn't look like they've got their hands on the steering wheel, but a lot of times, a lot of that machinery now is auto-steered off of GPS. So we get it lined up, we push a button, the computer takes over and steers it for us going out across the field. So it's kind of cool. So that's what goes on there. So seed placement, granular placement, spreading, slinging, whatever, getting it out there somehow. Here's the liquid. So liquid we can get our head wrapped around. That's what we're going to be working on in the lab on Wednesday, is looking at liquid application and how we do that, and looking at the distribution uniformity. How uniform is that across there? So basically I've got a boom. Typically the way we do this is we have a long boom with some type of a plumbing that carries my liquid out there, and then a whole bunch of nozzles out here that are going to direct that material, change the particle size, get that material directed to the ground or to the target, whatever it needs to be. If I'm trying to target plants, if I'm trying to target the ground, whatever it is I'm trying to target, that's what we put it out there. So that's typically how that happens, okay? So think about uniformity across that machine. Oh no, you broke my marker. They fall off, that's okay. Don't worry about it. I just saw the look on her face, her eyes went really big. Like, oh no, I broke it. No, don't worry about it. They're educational aids, that's why I pass them around. They're old, you can see how that plastic's faded, so it's actually got old on there. So, but think about uniformity across that. That's a pretty small machine there that mounts on the back of the tractor. A lot of these are specialty machines, so if I unfold this thing, so there's the boom, I unfold it again, and then I unfold it again, and this is literally how that machine will fold. So that machine will fold like that, so it's all hydraulic. Push a button in the cab, and it unfolds like that. So That's a big wide machine. So in real life, this is 64th scale. Real life, these are common in the United States up to 120 feet from tip to tip. So basically what I tell when I'm doing kid programs, 3 school buses end to end. So if I park 3 school buses end to end behind this machine is a little bit wider than 3 school buses, 3 typical school buses. So pretty big machine. Now we're seeing some machines coming out of Europe, and there's some short line manufacturers in the US that are making booms that go up to about, they're 50 meters, so basically 170 some feet. So they're just monstrosity, big booms, you know, really wide kind of machine. So this is typical scale here. That's a 120-foot boom on a 30-second scale. So it'll give you a little bit of idea, you know, just how big these things are. So think about nozzles across there. Typically those nozzles are spaced every 20 inches. So that's 72 nozzles on a 120-foot boom. Are every one of those nozzles uniform and precise and exact? Yeah, so that's part of what we're going to look at tomorrow, or Wednesday. What we're going to look at is that particular nozzle out there. And there's a lot of different nozzles. And you know, we could literally have several weeks of class just talking about those nozzles. You can pass that around. Talking about nozzle technology and different flow rates that we want to control, different droplet sizes and all that kind of stuff that we can control out of there, because sometimes I need really fine droplets. But really fine droplets, what happens to a really fine droplet? What happens when the wind blows? It goes away in the breeze. And so if you're spraying something, you know, and there's a housing development right next to your field and a bunch of rose bushes over there, and you're killing broadleaf weeds, what's going to happen to those rose bushes? And that old lady's not going to be happy. So yeah, you want to keep the target, keep the chemical where you want it. That's a really big deal. So, you know, what kind of nozzle technology do we have? And we'll look at some different nozzle technologies tomorrow. That's what we'll spend a couple minutes looking at, just showing you some of the different things that help us to reduce drift, help us to control the size of droplets that's coming out of that thing, where they're going, where they're not going, and all that kind of stuff. So that's a big deal for operators, for people that are managing these machines, to know what's the right nozzle to put on there and how to use it. Okay, so that's a big deal that we have to think about, right? So what else we got to look at on these machines? So think about that. That is a big pillow. This thing is big. It's really flimsy. So I'm not going to pass this around because this boom will break. I've broken it 3 times, I think, already. Just trying to unfold it, me looking at it. So cool thing, by the way. See the number on the back? Any idea what that is? Can you see that number?
It's the speed it can travel.
Yeah, that's the speed limit. So, and that's a European thing, which is kind of funny because this is not a European machine, but that's a European thing. So all machines in Europe are going to have a round number like that on the back. So that's 35 kilometers per hour. So that's the speed limit for this machine. So you can get a speeding ticket on a machine in Europe. So if your machine is not rated for above a certain speed and you drive that machine too fast and they use a radar gun, they can give you a speeding ticket for driving a tractor too fast. Okay? And especially where they get in trouble a lot is if you have a tractor that might have a speed limit of 45 kilometers per hour. That's not unusual. There's some pretty high-speed tractors over there. But they'll put a wagon or something like that on it that doesn't. And they'll be driving too fast, and they'll go by, and the cops look at that sign in the back and say, oh, no. So we're going to make some money off you. So anyway, yeah, that's the speed limit back there. So that's the speed limit for this. Instead of posting it on the road, you post it on the machine. So you got to have that displayed there. So. But anyway, you know, think about the chemical and how we mix it in here. And I'm going to give you an idea of, you know, just to picture some of the research that we're working on now. A lot of people are looking at, and some we're doing here in the department and other places. But typically we got a big tank on here. So you got this big gray tank, and that's where I'm going to put the carrier and the chemical. So a traditional way of managing that thing is I fill this thing up with water. Again, on these big machines, we're talking 1,000 to maybe 1,500 gallons. So huge big tanks of water on these things. And we're going to mix the chemical into that tank. So whatever chemical we have, we figure out, okay, so I got 1,000 gallons of water. How fast am I going to go? What's my application rate that I need? You know, all that stuff that I did on the videos. So how many gallons or ounces or whatever I'm putting in here. So sometimes, we're literally putting, in 1,000 gallons, we may be putting like a half a cup of material in there, and that gets diluted and that becomes effective out in the field. So, some pretty potent stuff. Sometimes it's gallons of stuff that we put in there. But anyway, we get to mix that chemical in there. And then it gets pumped and distributed. Now this thing doesn't show all the plumbing, but there's going to be hoses and everything that are going out across this boom and nozzles to be able to distribute that. So think about some of the challenges with that. So wake up and talk to me a little bit. What are some challenges in terms of going back to that goal that we want to distribute stuff out in the field at the right rate with a uniform distribution? So what are some things that are going to give me some challenges?
I think it'd be hard to spread all the material at the same rate, just depending on the distance along the boom.
Why? Keep going.
Because the spriggers out at the end have a much bigger distance to go.
So what happens when I push material through a pipe?
Pressure.
Pressure drop, yep. So, and what we're going to find tomorrow with those nozzles, as we change the pressure at the nozzle, that's going to change the flow rate through the nozzle. So, oh man, okay. So can I really maintain a uniform flow rate 60 feet away from my center distribution there? All right, so that's one challenge. So how do we get around that? How do we meet that challenge? So as an engineer, what would you do?
Don't you isn't in the nozzle, it adapts the pressure, whatever, so they're all the same?
They really don't. They're really relying on the supply pressure. Maybe you're thinking of a technology that I'm not connecting with you on, but I'm not aware of anything that it's basically an orifice. So what most of these nozzles are, now there are some nozzles that do some different things that are really, really expensive nozzles, but most of our typical nozzles are literally just a hole. They're literally just an orifice. So we put material there, we put fluid there at a certain pressure, and you guys have seen the orifice equation at some point in your careers, right? So, it changes, the flow rate changes with pressure. So if that pressure's changing out here, if that pressure's lower out here than it is in here, yeah, there's going to be less stuff coming out of these nozzle tips. All right, so what else am I going to do?
This may not make sense, but would they design everything based on the nozzle that's furthest away and then just keep uniformity going inward?
So how would you do that? The answer is yes. So how would you do that?
Determine, I don't know, the flow rate that you actually want, then find the pressure out there, and then whatever pressure, you determine your nozzle size, and then you just keep it the same on the inner ones, maybe?
So, okay, so you're going to reduce the pressure down here.
I don't know.
So limit the pressure a little bit. Yeah, possibly. How would you do that?
I don't know after that.
No, I mean, you're exactly on. Keep going. That's kind of what they do, but there's a pretty simple way to do it. All right, you're exactly right. Keep going, keep digging. So, Landon, you said, okay, the pressure's going to be different out here. Why? Why is the pressure lower out here?
Because of the distance.
It's the distance, but go a little bit deeper. It's a distance.
There'll be more friction.
There'll be more friction in a pipe, right? How do I reduce the friction, pressure losses, friction losses in a pipe?
Make the pipe bigger.
Make the pipe bigger. Oh, so could I adjust diameters of hoses or lengths of hoses with, yeah. So we do some stuff like that. So we use bigger hoses and stuff like that. And generally what the manufacturers do is use fairly large diameter plumbing just so that I don't have those friction losses. So they have a lot more volume than what flow rate I really have to have going through there. So that's kind of how they manage it. So yeah, you're right. Okay, you got the idea. That's the kind of thought process that makes you good engineers. All right, let's come up with some creative way. That's not really expensive. Some people think, well, okay, maybe I could put an auxiliary pump out in the end here that kind of pushes a little bit more or something like that. Man, that's expense. That's more power. So, but simple thing. Yeah. hose size, let's play around with hose size, what's that gonna do to us? Okay, so a lot of that goes into that design, right? So yeah, there's a lot of challenges there to think about how to distribute that material. And then how much material do I have back there? Think about that. I have a hose, basically, that's 120 feet long and probably several hoses, because what I'm going to do is break this up. I'll break this up into multiple sections. So typically, this boom, these big booms will be broken up into 6 or 8 sections. So I've got a hose that's going out to each section and then a pipe to distribute it and a hose going out to here. So I've got multiple hoses going out there. And on the big machines, when I was on sabbatical, I was working on the case version of this machine. And basically, if you drain just the plumbing in the boom, so if you just drain the liquid out of that plumbing, you get around 50 gallons of material just in the hoses. That's a lot of material, right? And that's a lot of material that has a chemical in it. So what happens at the end of the day, how do I get that material out of there? I've got to clean that thing. How do I clean the thing? Well, I got to put fresh water in and then push it through and triple rinse it and do that. How many gallons of water am I using just to rinse and clean this thing out? So clean out is a huge issue with some of these machines just because of volume. So I got this 1,500 gallon tank up here that I somehow have to wash, and then all the pumps and plumbing and everything that goes out from there. So there's a lot of clean out and a lot of issues there to be thinking about in terms of that. So some real design challenges. I mean, first off, you didn't think, well, it's simple. You put a pump with some hoses out there, nozzles, T's, and away we go, you know? Like, no, there's a lot more to that to think about that. So some of the innovations that people are working on, we've got some research projects here that I'm working on, Dr. Sama's working on some of that stuff. We're saying, okay, what if we don't mix the chemical here? Let's don't mix it in the tank. Let's mix it downstream somewhere. So after it comes out of the tank, after the pump pushes that water, clean water, out toward the boom, let's inject that material into the water as it's going out to the boom. Then guess what? At least I don't have to clean the 1,500 gallon tank, right? I'm still going to have the 50 gallons of stuff that's going out into the boom, but at least I don't have to clean the tank. So we're trying to move that injection further downstream. So I'm going to have some other tanks, so like this black one on top, or there you put them different places on here. And that's where I'm going to put the concentrated chemical, and then I'm going to meter that concentrated chemical into the water stream as it's going out to the booms. And now I don't have to clean all that stuff out. So in one of the projects that we're working on, we're looking at, okay, let's not even put it in the boom. Let's go clear out to the nozzle, and let's put it in the nozzle. So let's put a little tiny hose, 2 hoses out across there. One big hose is just water, and it should just spit water out, and here we go, that's good. Then I've got this little hose with these little valves, and that's injecting that chemical into each one of those nozzles. The right amount that I need in each nozzle. Crazy? Yeah. Why does that matter? Okay, here's another thing to think about. This machine, all our fields are not big and straight and square, right? Sometimes we have to turn. Do you see it? What happens when I turn this machine? And it goes around the corner.
Outside's going.
Outside. She was looking at it right away going, oh yeah, I see what's happening. That outside goes real fast. So you don't have to turn this machine very much. I mean, you can see that just a little bit of turning in that machine, that outside goes a whole lot faster than the inside. What's that doing to my application rate on the ground out here? Wow, it's changing it, right? So in fact, you know, when I turn real short, I can actually make this boom go backwards, and I can spray back and forth and double and triple cover stuff, you know, as if I wiggle around, going around tight corners. So, but now if I'm injecting the chemical at each one of these nozzles out here, when I start around the corner, I have the ability to say, let's put a little more chemical coming out of this one and not as much chemical coming out of that one down there. And so as I go around the corner, I can have a uniform application rate on the ground. The flow rate is different coming out of them, but what's actually hitting the ground is the right amount of chemical everywhere I need across the back of that boom. So all that extra expense and everything kind of makes a difference because, again, think about those chemicals. And we have a chemical that I'm putting, you know, half a cup or a cup of material in 1,000 gallons typically, that is very potent chemical. If I double cover that chemical, what's probably going to happen out there? Bad things, you know. So if I'm trying to kill a weed and I double cover that stuff, I'm going to end up killing plants, killing my crop. And so we see a lot of crop burn and stuff like that just because these things turn. So sometimes you get some aerial shots of fields and you can tell exactly where the path of the machine was. Every time the machine turned, that I would have a burn on the inside of that turn because there would be too much chemical going in there. And you can see those patterns in the crop. So being able to control at that level. So have I impressed you a little bit? All right. Are you thinking about some of the issues with this big equipment, some of the engineering challenges, some of the opportunities for advancements, new technologies, advanced stuff to do some pretty cool things with these machines. So there's a lot of stuff. These are fun to work with. I think it's a fascinating research field just because of all that stuff that's going on. Some kind of neat things that you can do there. So cool and fun and big and fast. And that's the coolest toy in the world. So just fun. The wheels come out too, so they get stuck. Oh no, I knocked the mirror off. That's bad. So, but yeah, the wheels come out and go in. It's really cool. One of my favorite ones. And the university bought it actually. All right, enough of that stuff. All right, what are we doing in the lab tomorrow? So let's talk about lab to make sure we get our heads wrapped around this. And I talked about this in the videos, so go back and watch it, but let's hit this again. So here's the concept. And you know, I started off looking at these spinner spreaders, and when you fling that stuff out there, it's not going to be uniform across the width of the machine. So you think about it as that machine goes, there's going to be some pattern to how that material is distributed. So typically more in the middle, less the further you go out. That's kind of physics. That's the limitation. That's kind of the way it works. Although we do get some oddball shaped patterns once in a while. And I think I showed you some of those, some real data that we had collected. So this is, you know, we want to look at the pattern. But the key thing, now here we're looking at a whole machine. So I go across the field with that machine and I'm slinging stuff out there. When I turn around and come back, where do I want that next pattern to be? So if I look at, you know, this pattern, actually this one up here is pretty nice and easy to look at. If that's my pattern in the machine, when I turn around and come back in the field, I don't want that next pattern to be right here, like that. Because if I do, I'm going to have part of my field that's not going to get enough stuff, right? So I need to overlap those two patterns by the right amount so that I get some from one trip, some from the other trip, and when I sum those together, when I add them up, I'm going to be fairly uniform across the whole width of the field. So we're looking at machine pass to machine pass. So that's why we look at how do we overlap these different patterns so that when we add them up, you know, if we had pans or something out there, which is what we do, literally, this is how we test that granular machine. These are pans, just flat pans about yay big. Then we lay on the ground, we drive through there, we spread the stuff, we let stuff fall in the pans. You pick them up and you pour the stuff out and weigh how much is in it. So I have some discrete value across the width of the machine, so the machine's going to drive through there, and I have some values across the width of the machine of how much is spread. And then I can tell you, okay, when you're using this machine, your spread pattern looks like this, so that your spacing between every pass across the field should be 50 feet or 60 feet or 48 and a half or whatever I tell them it needs to be. Okay? So that's what we come up with there. Does that make sense of what we're trying to do? So you're going to do that tomorrow with sprayer nozzles. Okay, so this is the table that we have in the lab down there that we're going to look at. So literally we put a nozzle up on top. I drew this on the video for you. So we put a nozzle up here. It's going to spray down on that table. And this table has grooves along there. Think of it like corrugated roofing, you know, just corrugated metal or whatever. This is a little more complicated than that. But basically grooves, and then it's going to take, basically taking slices of that pattern and saying, funnel it into each one of these glass tubes down here. And so when you're done, you're going to be able to see a pattern. So this is where my nozzle hit. You're going to be able to see the levels of material in these tubes that'll look something like that for whatever shape that you're going to be. So I'm going to have more material in the center, maybe I'll have a dip in the center. I don't know what we're going to come up with. I'm going to pull out some weird nozzles for us to play with on Wednesday, but we're going to have a pattern. So what I'm asking you to figure out then is, if I had another nozzle, so I'm going to spread these nozzles out across the boom on the back of that machine. So how close do those nozzles have to be together, or what kind of spacing should I have so that the next pattern will overlap by the right amount, and when I sum them up, the sum is going to be as uniform as possible. So that's what we're trying to accomplish, that's what we're trying to do, okay? Does that make sense? So the concept is pretty simple. How do we do that? So it becomes a mathematical challenge, or mathematical, we've got to go through this. And I went through this in the video, and I encourage you to go back. I'm not going to go through it step by step again, but now we talk about it here. Go back to the video and try to grasp what's going on. So if we take this data, and we get a height for every one of these, and whatever the tubes are spaced out there, so we can actually get a geometric width of that. So we're going to have so many milliliters in each one of these tubes that you measure going across there. So you can put that in a spreadsheet. So you can build a spreadsheet that this is the center, this is where your nozzle is, but I've got all these cells of data here. That's my pattern. So I'm basically taking all those milliliter values, put them in a column, and that's what I got there, okay? So that's my pattern, right? And I suggested in there that a lot of these are not going to be perfectly symmetrical, and if we were doing this, we would test a whole bunch of nozzles over and over and over again, and get a variety and all that kind of stuff to really see what's going on. What I suggest for you guys is to flip that and average the two. So what you'll come up with is a symmetrical pattern, okay? So it would be kind of like a cheap way of making that, of doing tests over and over and over again to get a real average of what it is. So just take this pattern, flip it, put it right here, average those two together, and then you'll get the actual pattern that you work with, and that'll be the actual, to be symmetric then, and to be one that you can work with mathematically. Okay, does that make sense? What you're going to do, I see a couple of them going, oh boy, starting to lose me now. So basically flip it. So let me go ahead and do this. So let me flip it like this. I think we'll step through it, give it the looks on your face. So this is flipped. And then I'm going to cell by cell, I'm going to average them together. So I'm going to go over here, and this is going to be my average. Average those two together. And I'm going to get another column of cells that looks like this. And this is going to be the pattern that I work with. So that's the column of cells. So I take my original data that I collect, flip it left and right, just mirror image the thing. So that's easy to do. And then do cell by cell all the way down, average this one with that one. And you come over here, that's what you're going to end up with for your final pattern. And that'll be symmetric. So if there's any asymmetricalities, they will work themselves out. You'll have a symmetric pattern that you can work with. Okay? And then the next step is duplicate that. So basically what I'm trying to do, this is not uniform. So if I look at the uniformity of this, we calculate the CV. I showed you that in the videos. That it's just a statistical thing, standard deviation by the average or whatever. It's coefficient of variation. Coefficient of variation on that would not be good. So what I need to do, and this is the center nozzle, you've got to keep track of where that center nozzle is. Where the nozzle is in the center of the pattern. It's not always right in the center of the pattern. It will be here now, but it may not be here. So to keep track of where that nozzle actually is. So what I'm going to do then is take that same pattern, duplicate it, but pretend like it's another nozzle pattern beside it. So basically that's what's going to happen. I'm going to have a second nozzle beside it on the boom, and some of that pattern from one nozzle is going to overlap from the pattern of the other nozzle. So the question is, how much do they need to overlap? And so here's where you're going to slide and calculate. All right, here's my center nozzle. So overlap these, so take, basically anywhere where I have spray from both nozzles hitting that surface area, I need to add those up. So what I need to do then is take those two patterns, add them to come up with what my total pattern is. This is what my total coverage would be. So some places, I'm only gonna, these cells down here, I'm only getting liquid from nozzle B down here. These cells up here, I'm only getting liquid from nozzle A. These cells in the middle, I'm getting liquid from both of them. So basically, I've got to add these up. So, it's this one plus 0 up here. This one plus this one in the center there is going to equal that. 0 plus this one is going to equal that. I go from nozzle center to nozzle center, and then here, this is where I look at the CV on that column. So that's the overlapped coverage. That's what's actually going to be overlapped. And I look at the CV on that and say, is that CV good or not? And here's where you got to do kind of a repetitive process, an iterative process. So let's keep sliding that. So, this is one spacing there. What's the CV for that spacing? Let's slide it out. Now I've got one extra cell in here, so, if I slide it out, there's going to be less overlap here, so I'm going to have an extra cell, so this pattern's going to be a little bit wider. So that changes. Now calculate the CV on that. So that's a new spacing. Slide it out, do it again. Slide it out, do it again. Slide it out, do it again. So ultimately what I'm going to end up with is that CV versus the spacing. So somehow, I don't know what this pattern is going to look like. It might look kind of weird and something like that. But somewhere there's going to be a minimum CV. Hopefully you can find a minimum CV to say, all right, this is the best. This is how much it should overlap to give me the most uniformity that I can achieve. This is as uniform as I can get. That's ultimately what I want to get at. And then that becomes my recommendation. Then I say, that's how far apart those nozzles should be. So then one more step that you have to do. Okay, 2 nozzle patterns here, looking at them from the side. Once I come up with, all right, this is the best spacing, the best overlap, this amount of overlap in there, or this spacing was the best for this particular nozzle, but I was testing them on that patternator table, and that was at a certain height. So it was basically at this height. Right there. What happens as the height changes? If I want to maintain that overlap, what do I have to do? Yeah, so if the height goes up, if my boom goes higher, what do I have to do with the nozzles to maintain that same overlap? So if the boom goes up, that'd be the same as moving the ground down. Think about moving the ground down, right? So move the ground down here, that's going to bring these patterns coming over here. There's going to be more overlap. And now I'm going to lose my uniformity. So I'm not going to be at my optimum CV. That's going to move me one way or the other on that CV chart. So if the boom goes up, my nozzles got to go out. All right? Now, in practicality, what happens most of the time is we don't change the nozzle spacing on there. So you're going to put the nozzles on, and whatever the spacing is on the boom, that's what you're dealing with. But now you ask yourself the other question, okay, we may have tested this at 30-inch height, 30-inch 30-inch boom height or something like that. And that came out with a spacing of 40 inches. That would be my optimum spacing. Well, these things are 20 inches. So what does that mean? Okay, so, optimum at 30 inches would be that. So if my spacing's down 20 inches, where does my boom have to be to make sure that that overlap happens at the same amount? This is linear, it's a geometric relationship. So you can kind of look at the geometry and figure that out. Basically, once you come up with these angles, then you've got it. So it becomes a geometric relationship. You can plug it into an equation, you can make a table or a chart or something like that. Typically, that's what we'll do for a nozzle specification sheet for a customer, so they can look at it. Okay, I'm on 20-inch spacing, so 20-inch spacing, I should run my boom at 24 inches off the ground. So they would know that. And so then they know that's where they run their boom. And the boom height can change. That's hydraulic. I can move that around and change that. So that's the second part of what you've got to do. Is that making sense? I see a lot of you kind of really dazed and confused on that. It's like, oh man.
How would the farmer change the spacing?
They would have to replumb the boom. So that's why they don't change the spacing. That's why they're locked into the spacing.
So then really you never would change the height?
So no, then you would have to change the height. So if I buy a different nozzle that wants a different kind of spacing, that's going to dictate how high I need to run my boom. So, and again, you know, I have hydraulics on these booms that allow me to raise and lower them. So I can raise, and this one's stuck right down there, it comes down. So I can run that boom way down to the ground if I need it really low. So, you know, depending on what that spacing is, or I could raise the boom up if I need, you know, a little bit more overlap or whatever. So, but you know, I'm not going to change the spacing probably, but what I will do is change that boom height. Okay, do you see the relationship? I see a lot of wrinkled up foreheads going on. I'm not sure I buy that.
What's the chart for it?
So the chart would be, you know, if I have, you know, 28-inch nozzle spacing, my sprayer is set up on 28 for whatever weird reason, I want to be able to go to a chart and say, okay, at 28 inches, here's how high I need to run my boom. So then I know, okay, go out here, figure out where the boom needs to be to get 40 inches or whatever I need off the ground, whatever my boom height would need to be. So that's what I'd have to come up with. So that's what the chart's going to tell me.
So the chart comes with the nozzle and not the machine?
That's correct. The chart comes with the nozzle. That's exactly correct, yep. We have all different kinds of nozzles. They have all different kinds of patterns. Some of them want what we call 100% overlap. So you'll have some nozzles that you're going to want the edge of this nozzle to actually hit the ground under the center of the nozzle beside it. So the next nozzle would actually always come in here as well. So every point on the ground is going to be receiving some material from two nozzles everywhere. Okay, so that would be 100% spacing. So I bring them in, so I have this one here, that one there, I've got the one in behind it, everything gets two. Here, like I've drawn it, only this area right in here is going to get material from two nozzles. This area over here is only getting material from one nozzle. Until you get over here where this next pattern will come in the side, and then I'll have another area over here that's going to get material from two nozzles. Okay, so that's the overlap. How much does that need to overlap? Again, different nozzles are designed with different patterns. Different nozzles are designed with a different angle up on the top. So, and I'll show you on the nozzles tomorrow or Wednesday that typically they're either 80 or 110. So, and there's numbers on there that show us that. So that angle, left to right, coming down from that nozzle is either usually 80 degrees or 110 degrees. So they're either relatively narrow or relatively wide. So that's what you typically see on those nozzles. So that's going to change. You know, if I got a really wide pattern, now I'm going to need to push that boom down because those things are really going to overlap. So I need to run that boom lower to the ground. If I have a narrower nozzle that shoots more straight down and not so wide, then I can raise my boom up. So that boom height is going to be dependent on that. Okay? Is that settling in a little bit now? Some of you shaking your head, some of you still not quite sure. We may need to see it when we get down there, and that may help us when we actually get our hands on it and make some spray. Yeah?
So we're doing a lot of stuff in Excel. As for actual ladder, we just take like kind of one measurement and then we flip that data. So
Yeah, so if we were doing this the right way, we'd have 100 nozzles, or maybe not 100, we'd have a bunch of different nozzles. And we'd get the pattern from a bunch of different nozzles. And you're kind of looking at, all right, what's the average over what this manufacturer is putting out? So what we're going to do is just look at one nozzle. And what you'll find is it won't come out to be symmetric, even though usually it's pretty close. If it's a good nozzle, they are almost always a pretty symmetric pattern. What you're going to find is, there's going to be some variation, some wonkiness in there somewhere. So you'll see a little bit of a skew or a high point over one side on the other side. So that the flip and average was just a trick that I told you, that I suggested you do, just to make that go better, just to make that sliding and averaging, when you sum up the two patterns. It'd be really tough to do that if those patterns aren't symmetrical. Because I get it, if I take this pattern, the original pattern that's not symmetric, and I just copy it and do that, I'm going to get one answer. If I take this original pattern and flip it, and then do that, I'm gonna get a different answer. So that's why I'm saying, okay, let's make it symmetric by copy it and flip it, average the two of them, and then we're gonna have a symmetric pattern to work with. So that's just to kind of help you out and make your lives a little bit easier. Okay? That's a substitute for not being down there for 2 days. Reading numbers off of a test tube. So, someday I'm gonna automate that, try to figure out how to automate that. What I really need to automate is all those pans, man. You gotta lay pans out in the field and drive a machine across it and pick up those pans. You know, that picture that we did there, they're actually doing research. Usually when we do this pattern, we do one row of pans across the width of the machine just to get the pattern side to side. And I'm with a group right now, we're working on a new standard, and we're actually thinking about doing 2 patterns. Just because if the machine hits a bump or something like that, it can actually make material come out funny. So we're looking at probably 2 patterns. What they were doing in this research, just a grad student we had a number of years ago, he was looking at how the pattern changes as we change application rate. So a lot of these machines, we can change the application rate on the go based on GPS and maps and all that kind of stuff. So he would drive into this at one rate, and then as he got into the pattern, he changed the rate to a lower rate. So as it went out the other side, it was going to be spreading a lower rate. That actually changed the distribution pattern pretty significantly on that machine that we were testing on that one. This one here that we were testing on that in that test. So that's what he was doing there. So basically there's 240 pans right there that every test, then you have to go out and dump 240 pans into a thing, put them on a scale and weigh them and write down the date and keep track of them. So that was a really arduous process. So if you can automate that, man, you got something pretty cool. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. That would be neat to do. But anyway, yeah, so you'll find it's some data. You'll have to collect the data, but you know, you're doing it once, it's not a big deal. So okay, understand it? Got the plan? Know where we're going? See y'all Wednesday. So we got half of us here too. 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Just under half of us, or just over half of us here today. I think I'll wait a while to post that video then. People know I'm videoing, they're just not going to come.